Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today on our webinar, AI and Your Legal Team, where we'll be covering top risks and opportunities. My name is Mary O'Carroll. I'm the Chief Community Officer here at Ironclad, and I will be your moderator today. A little bit about me quickly. I've been at Ironclad on the exec team for a couple of years now. Prior to this, I was at Google for 13 years running legal operations and technology, where I actually met Dana and used to work together. And I also helped to build and lead an organization called Clock. So I've been around the circle for a while. And I am so happy to be joined today by three amazing leaders who I have individually looked up to forever. So this is really, really a treat for me. We'll be joined by Eleanor Lacey, General Counsel at Asana, Dana Wagner, Chief Legal Officer at Twilio, and Alan C., Global Chief Legal Officer at JLL. I'm going to let them quickly introduce themselves. So, Eleanor, perhaps we can start with you.
Okay. First, I wanted to say thank you for all the people showing up. I see your names and I see a lot of people that I work with now, but also people I worked with many, many years ago. So it's really exciting to see people showing up and being involved in this. I'm Eleanor Lacey. I'm the General Counsel at Asana. I've been there for about 4 years. We were private when I started. We are now public. We're a work management platform. And so you can think about that as we start with tasks, then we have projects, then we have project portfolios, then we have goals. So that kind of a triangle. So you can imagine AI is a big part of what we're thinking about right
now. Awesome. Dana?
Sure. Dana Wagner, nice to see you again, Mary, and be on this panel. I also love seeing all the names come in the locations. Some places like Chicago and San Francisco, I spent a lot of time. So lots of love to the people coming from there. I've spent my career both in government and in the private sector, in-house and a little bit in academia. I'm currently the Chief Legal Officer at Twilio. As you said, Twilio is a communications technology and enterprise software company helping our customers engage better with their customers through digital channels. And so very interested in AI and the potential it can bring to that space.
Excellent. Last but not least, Alan.
Hi, I'm Alan Say. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at JLL. We are a global real estate services company. Fortune 200, we have 105,000 employees worldwide, lead a team of about 200 plus lawyers in legal and compliance. I feel like I'm the only non-tech guy on this panel over here, but it started my career in Silicon Valley way back in the 90s doing some of that stuff. So thanks for having me.
Oh, Alan, isn't every company somehow a tech company these days?
We like to say we are, but I don't think we are the same as my colleagues here on the panel.
Well, and
that's
then
what we're here to talk about a little bit.
Exactly. I think that your perspective is actually super interesting. So we are super excited to have you today. For everyone in attendance, a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you for submitting questions in advance during registration. That's really helpful. We got a ton of questions. We're going to try to use those to guide our conversation today. But before we start, a little housekeeping. We have I have a feeling that we're going to have enough of a discussion from what we got submitted in advance. We'll try to save some time at the end for live Q&A, so feel free to drop questions and comments in the chat on the side. We've got some moderators who are going to help us answer questions there and make sure that we see what is going on. So for my panelists, there's, I think, really two ways that we can really talk about how folks in legal departments and roles like yours, specifically in leadership roles, are grappling with AI today. It's on everyone's minds. It's part of every conversation. But, sort of first there is the responsible use of AI for your organization's business and then for your employees, right? And then there's the other side, which is how are you leveraging AI and that technology within your own legal teams to kind of make your lawyers more efficient. So I'd love to just kind of open it up to a discussion about those two ideas. How are they manifesting in your roles today?
now. I could start off. And I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming in as well of do we have policies? We think about AI a lot. And part of what we did as a team to prepare for this, we started thinking, gosh, it could be kind of stressful. You don't know much about it. Nobody knows a lot about it. So there's two sides of it, right? There's the learning how AI works in your product, how you might use Copilot or ChatGPT to actually generate code that helps the engineers create product. There's that part of it. So there's the learning the law around it, which is thinking a lot about copyright law. Then there's the other part of what do we do in our everyday life, and how do we both learn it and not feel intimidated by it, and how do we use it to our advantage? So I have things that I call spirit killers, and actually I didn't create that name. Someone I worked with at SurveyMonkey did, and they were just we asked each other, like, what are the things when you get this work you just go, I got to do it. And so we've thought about how can we use AI to address things that we all feel are spirit killers. So one thing I started using it for was summarizing things. I don't like to go in and read and then have to rewrite it and summarize it. AI can do that for me. The other thing that I started doing and asking the group to do is find ways to use it in my everyday life that can start to teach me how to do it in a more natural way. So, for example, I asked somebody who's very, very good at AI, how do I think about it? I'm using it like search, and that's not really what AI is. And he said, why don't you start using it as a tutor? Go in and ask it to tutor you on AI, and then ask it to put it in a chart for you and create a glossary. So I started doing that just to get a little more immersed in it.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I mean, I think the first thing to say with AI is that there's been a lot of tech fads over the past, years. This one, at least for us in our business, feels more real in terms of potential for change and in terms more of an impact. We didn't turn into a blockchain company. We didn't jump into the metaverse as the next be all and end all. But AI seems to have enough, and generative AI in particular, and I think we should be careful about what kind of AI we're talking about, seems to really have the potential to change how we work and how our services interact with customers. And so there's a lot of excitement and interest about it. I think you're right to point out, Marion, and we can talk about internal versus external. But when something like this comes out, and there's a rush to understand it, there's a rush to experiment with it and play with it, you immediately start thinking, if you're running a legal department, about, well, what are some guidelines? What are some responsible principles or guardrails to put around this? And for us, it's really been a situation of you need to have something in place. You don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And you're not going to have the answer when something is this new and there's so much potential around it, but it's really not defined yet fully how you're going to use it. So we talk about external uses separately, but for internal uses, we just didn't want disasters on day one. We didn't want some random engineer putting all the proprietary information of a customer into a publicly available large language model and having it train on it. So I think we just tried to get our hands around as quickly as possible on the categories of use, and just set some basic guardrails. We're like, how can employees, what are do's and don'ts with AI? We want them experimenting. We want them thinking about how we can use this better for ourselves and our customers. But these are the models it's safe to interact with. We have relationships with these folks. There's differences between putting publicly available data into a public model versus proprietary data into a proprietary model that's not trained. There's whole different categories. So I think just setting up some basic do's and don'ts first, knowing that that's not going to be where things land. That is not going to be the last iteration. Just so people don't feel like they're flying blind. You don't inadvertently have someone do something weird with that. That's how we approached it at the beginning. So it was sort of a basics approach of what are the fundamentals, and let's figure this out as it evolves.
Let me just ask you a quick question, because this idea came up a lot on our last webinar on AI as well. And my question for you, for all those principles, is that any different with how you tell people to use and share data with any IT technology systems and tools that you have in-house? Or is generative AI something that you're thinking about slightly differently?
I guess I would say is in most ways it's probably not fundamentally different, but there's just less awareness of the consequences and what things can, if I enter a question into a chatbot, so what we call prompt data, where does that go? Well, what are they doing with? Well, the answer depends on what chatbot I'm using, what relationship we have. So I think it's just people aren't as intuitively sensitive yet to the different gradations of what can happen. And so you have to do a little bit of education. The fundamental principles are basically, in my mind, the same. I mean, you don't want to use, confidential sensitive data in the wrong way, when you use individualized versus anonymized aggregated data. But people they're interacting with this thing and they're not as used to what it is and what's going on behind the scenes. And that's where some education is helpful.
And I
Absolutely agree,
sorry,
right?
Go ahead.
So I mean that's exactly where we landed too, right? You're not going to put the toothpaste back in the bottle. You're not going to tell our people to stop using it. That does not work. I can't get my 17-year-old daughter to stop using it for homework, right? So I got 105,000 employees. That's just not going to happen. So where we is exactly where Dana mentioned, right? We looked at it as an opportunity to do a little training. It's just a reminder. The principle is the same, but reminders. We put out policy almost immediately, essentially saying, hey, these are the ones that you can use because we have licenses to it. Right? We can use it commercially, so you can use it, but this is how you should use it, right? Client information, confidential information, you can't put it in there because it will go live. That's the first iteration. And then just a reminder about, the same rules still apply, right? If you get a picture, right, we got to make sure that if you get a picture from Google, you got to make the same thing as getting a picture here. You got the right to use it, the right to license. And just a little bit of training. It's a policy, it's in the form of policy, but it's much more training-ish. That's the first iteration on it. And then yesterday, we just launched JL GPT, right? A closed system for our own employees that we partner with Microsoft on so that we can really go hard on this and put in client data and things like that. So we iterated as we go along. We want to be in the forefront. We want to be innovators, right? We joke about the fact that we are a real estate services company, but we like to think that we're the best technology play in the company. So in order to do that, we have to get our people used to using the language, used to play with it a little bit, especially since I have no faith in my ability to stop people from playing with it anyway. So
yeah.
Yeah, you want the experimentation. The potential is enormous. So you just want it to happen in a responsible way. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and this leads right into the top question. Are we creating AI-specific policies? And if so, who at the company is leading that charge? Is it legal or another department? And the answer is yes. Right, legal is leading it, and security is leading it, and engineering is leading it. And we all collaborate together on basic policies. What I always think about as policies is you have to have policies that people understand, first of all. And when they're interacting with ChatGPT, for instance, they may not even know there are different forms of AI, some that are private, some that are not. It all kind of feels private to people. So I do think that education is really important of what are the different ways you can use it and what are the different platforms, whether you're using a paid version internally or you're just going out and using a free version externally. What is confidential information, right? That goes back to, that's no different whether it's with AI or anything else. What's confidential information that if you're thinking about having it leave the company, do you have the right to do that? And who do you talk to? And in what way does it leave the company, right? So if you think of other types of confidential information, you need an NDA, right? You don't have an NDA with a chatbot. So it's really just trying to get people the issue spot. And that goes back to, is it understandable? And is it realistic? So I have talked to some people who are like, oh, lawyers who say you shouldn't be using it at all. It's a terrible thing to use. Bad. Yep. I'm scared. It's risky. And my answer is, well, if you do that, then everybody's going to use it with zero guardrails because they can't talk to you. They can't educate you. And that's been something that's been very helpful for me is as I'm working with the teams and saying, here, I'm thinking about this or that, I go to the engineers and I say, this is the thing that I want to understand more. And they're like, no, you think you want to understand that. It's actually this other thing that you don't even know exists. And now we're going to educate you on it. And I think having that back and forth is incredibly helpful as a lawyer because I'm not also a coder. So the analogies that I make are sometimes completely wrong, and they will correct me on it, and it's helping me learn and better identify where I think the risks are. So making your policies understandable, really what legal does is we review other people's policies and then put in our own words too, because we have a privacy team, right, that's thinking about it. We publish as a company our AI I can't think of the word, but basically not our policies, but our thinking around AI, and how we're planning to use it. So that answers some of the other questions of we commit to being transparent where we're using it and where we're not. Safety is a commitment we're making. And then we focus on people, right? AI is not a thing that does anything for us. It's people with AI. And so that's part of the policies that we're writing, that if you're using AI, you also have to have somebody reviewing it. It doesn't run the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of good things in what Eleanor just said. I mean, first of all, I think you're right. I mean, AI does create, it passes the Turing test. It creates this false sense of intimacy and personal, privacy, which is an illusion. I mean, I think the protagonist of the movie Her finds this out. So you have to have people sensitive to that. And you have to create the principles around it, and to get to the question that you start off with, in a very collaborative way. Like, it's not like an FCPA compliance policy or GDPR policy where my privacy team, my legal team can just go off and write that kind of pretty much in a silo and present it to the business of here's what we have to do. You have to do this in collaboration with your security team, your product and engineering team. If the CEO says to you, hey, we need some principles about responsible use around AI, go write that. You have to ask, well, like, what are we looking to do with it? These things are so fact specific. Like, what kind of data do we have? What are the applications we're interested in? Probably on day one, the answer from the product or engineering team is, well, we're not really sure. And you're like, okay, well, that matters. We can set some fundamental ground rules, but we need to sit down together and figure out what the possibilities of AI mean for us and how to guide people through those. It has to be a very cross-functional effort at this stage, because you can't set principles without knowing what's important and where the opportunities are, and what the potential risks are. And to some extent, you can do some basics now, as we talked about earlier, but the technology also has to catch up a bit, and the infrastructure has to catch up a bit to what we want to do. And we can talk about, everyone went to the White House, these big AI companies that came out. So we're going to be transparent with AI. We're going to be responsible with AI. Well, what does transparency mean with AI? Like, one thing it can mean, as Eleanor said, is very true, is like, well, transparency about when you're using it and when things are, I think that's important. But I think, to me, ultimately, transparency would mean if someone gets an output from a generative AI model that they're concerned about, you can look back and you can say, okay, well, what data went into that? What was the model that was applied? How was this result produced? And there's sort of an audit trail of how AI produced the results. So if it is doing something wonky, you can sort of identify how or what the cause is. Things like that can be important for IP concerns as well. But that doesn't really exist today. Like, we don't really have the tooling in any of these providers that I'm looking at to do that. So it's aspirational now. So I think it's important to get ahead with the principles. It's important to have specificity around what your business is looking for, so you can make those principles more concrete and useful. But there's going to be some things we want that there's going to be a bit of a alternating catch-up game between the policies and the technology to support them. That's the world I think we're getting into.
No, I understand why people are uncomfortable, right? It's exactly what you just pointed out, Dana, right? Because they don't know, right? They don't know how the hallucinations happen. They don't know how fake cases are drafted, right? And so people are incredibly, there is no audit trail. You can't figure out how the guy who got disbarred, he still can't figure out why that happened, except for the fact that he was lazy. He didn't look it up himself.
He should have seen that coming. But yeah, no, I mean, it is an interesting cautionary tale, and you can see how that happened.
So I understand why people are cautious, but the point that that my team immediately got together and we were talking about what we should do is exactly what Eleanor, you pointed out, right? It's communication, right? Because if we don't have a communication with our business, like every other issue that we've ever had, then we're going to end up being cops and no one's going to talk to us, right? And they're still going to use it. It's just they won't tell us how they're using it and we can't help, right? It's like everything that we do in this company, it's about what are we going to do in order to further the business? How can we move it forward? And how can we protect it, right? And that's a conversation between us and the business, right? We can't do it alone. You can't write this in an ivory tower, and you have to have that conversation. So the first principle that we tap on is that, okay, let's figure out how we're going to enable our people to use it. Let's figure out a way, all the things that they're trying to use it, and figure out how we can help them, right? Because putting a blanket rule that says, hey, we don't understand it, we don't know this thing, so no one can use it. great. It's going to sound great on a piece of policy, but in your words, it's a different type of spirit killer, right? They're going, oh, great, Legal's doing that. Well, I'm still going to use it, right? A big part of our business is we're brokers. We're real estate brokers, commercial real estate brokers. One of the easiest uses of this thing, what does generative AI do really well? It reads and it writes really well right now, right? Guess what? Our brokers were the first one to do it because description of 2,000 square feet, floor, boom, they can generate it like that. So I knew that was not going to happen. We weren't going to prohibit it, right? So how can we do it? So how can we do it legally? How can we do it in a protective way? And how can we learn and iterate, right? And I think it's the same thing that everyone has always said. I'm not trying to get it perfect. We know that we're going to have to move a little bit as we learn. That's okay. But let's get it out there. Let's remind people basic principles of confidentiality, basics like that. It's just another way to remind folks. But let's embrace it and let's learn and let's get in the front foot as much as we can.
Yeah. Describe all of these properties so that they sound beautiful, but it's an accurate description. That's a pretty powerful thing. I think what you just said is super important too. You have to be genuine about the possibilities and the potential of this technology, or else you're sort of missing a big opportunity. And like, we make call centers, we make digital engagement tools for businesses to do customer service and marketing. Like, generative AI has huge potential here. And if your people aren't excited about that, like, you've got the wrong people. Now, if they're reckless about like where that could go off the rails, you've also got the wrong people. But it can't be we're the stereotypical bad, conservative in-house team that's looking to say no, right? Like, if your partners who you're relying on, as I was talking about, to understand what's going on and what we can actually do and what's possible, don't get the sense that your team is as excited as they are about the potential, how this could really drive the business forward, you're going to miss things. It's not going to be a great collaboration. Now, again, you've got to bring that risk management, like responsibility perspective. That's what they're being paid for as well. But and some healthy skepticism and fear is good. But if it's excessive, you and your company are going to miss the opportunity. That's a phenomenal point, I think.
One of the questions that I think is really helpful addressing what you're talking about, Dana, is someone wrote, this presupposes that we have digital fluency sufficient to know the art of the possible. And I think that's, how do you help people be curious, and how do you help people really embrace it, because you have to. This is not like some of the technology fads, right? We all do need to learn this. Our kids are using it in school already daily. And if you think they aren't, they really probably are, at least in the US. And I think that's actually another really important point here. So one of the ways that we're thinking about it is, what are the differences you could have by geography in terms of how it's embraced, right? The EU is looking at a whole separate commission. Somebody asked about GDPR here. Well, it's going to be a whole separate commission. They've already got pre-drafted regulations. And there's a lot of questions out there. Will it be, applicable to every individual, these regulations? So if you have Europeans working in your company, or Europeans working in companies that use your product, will the European regulations apply to them regardless of where they're located? There'll be a lot of different questions, and that's going to take some time to work through. So it's keep an eye on that and learn. But one of the things that we're doing in terms of learning the art of the possible, first of all, we're asking a lot of questions. Those of us who are not as techie are, so that's me. We're going to other people and saying, how do I do it? And then also asking people within legal, I was like, who loves this? Who does this in their free time? And a couple people raised their hands. I was like, could you put together some tasks for people to try? So one that I really liked was somebody put together a little bot and said, you can try it too, because there were a lot of us who were like, we don't know how to make bots, and put where you go, how you create a bot. And he used it to train himself on how to negotiate a term better. So he was in the product support legal part of our group, And he used it for a commercial purpose of, let me go look at this provision. How would I negotiate this provision? And then he kept refining it. And you can also do things like, I want to change my tone in that. So that's actually something we have in our product already, that you can turn on of, can you look at my tone?
Right.
And tell me, do I sound snarky or do I sound curious? You know, what it is. And can you help me? You can change the tone range and help me be sort of harsher or less harsh. So really giving examples for people and doing it together, that's how we can also help people learn it and embrace it. We also have people in the company who maybe are in engineering and they're experimenting with stuff, and they present once a week, and you can just tune in and see what they're doing. And it goes back to the art of the possible of, like, I couldn't even imagine this stuff. It's not like I could go off on the weekend and say, I think I'll go practice it. So it really helps to have some people in the company who share what they're doing with it.
I'd love to hear how you guys are thinking about it internally within your legal departments. If we can kind of shift to that part of our conversation. Eleanor, you touched on it a bit. You know, what is the sentiment of your lawyers? Are you sort of having to tell them to experiment, to not be afraid of this? And, you know, are there things that you're already doing and trying?
Yeah, I mean, I think Eleanor alluded to one thing, which is that there's lots of ways legal departments should be able to harness AI, you know, going forward. First of all, a lot of our technical infrastructure, like you know, our contract management systems, ironclad representatives, could really get enhanced, and processes could be smoothed out and made more scalable by applying it in the right way. I think eventually there's a lot of sort of high volume routinized types of contracts and negotiation it could probably manage. It's not totally there today, but it's already, this is probably an analogy to all the, you know, the school children and things like that we were talking about. It's already helpful for sort of initial drafts or first takes or rough cuts at things with a lot of types of legal work. I mean, I was dealing with a corporate situation and sort of out of curiosity, without having any identifiable or personal information, I put something in a chat bot to say, draft a letter to a counterparty in this type of situation that accomplishes this. And it spat something out, which I wouldn't have sent it, for a variety of reasons. Risks of hallucination, tone was off, the things that were alluded to earlier. But it was a decent starting point. And I could see sort of use it. And so I think for litigators, for people who are drafting, various communications, it's already useful as just to get people out the gate with a first draft that they can refine. This goes back to principles we put in place. You have to be careful. You don't want people, accepting that a case exists because the chatbot tells you it does. But it's already useful as a force multiplier for that, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, so I think it's two different things, right? I think Eleanor said it best, right? There's some people who are just already into it, right? Yeah. You don't have to encourage them. You kind of have to pull them back a little bit, right? There's a second set of principles that you have to put out for the legal department, right? Because this thing, right, depending on your ask, 60, 80% right? We're operating in a world 100% certainty. So you got to look up every case, look up every reg. I have people using it to hey, what's the Apple law in India for something like that? And they pull it up. You have to look up the actual citations, right? So I think the harder part is that there's a lot of people who won't use it, who don't use it, right? I'm 52 years old. I can barely use this thing. I go to my tech guru, my 17-year-old daughter, on this stuff. But you can get in a rabbit hole. So we had some of our, I'll tell you a fun story, right? Some of our folks were using it, trying to teach others, hey, how powerful this is, and talk about tone. He started drafting everything in the pirate voice. Right? And you can go in a rabbit hole. I don't know how many hours were spent, trading emails and trading various things in various voices, like pirates talk. So people using it fun. I encourage that, embrace it, because I think it's a different way of asking a question, right? To your point of how you ask the question, I think in ChatGPT is going to be different. Some different language we're all going to have to learn. There's no urgency. There's no mandate for folks to use it. People are interested in it, are going to do it. People are not. But as a legal department, how we're looking at it, there's tremendous potential, right? What is ChatGPT really good at? I just mentioned, right? Writing and reading. That's where the potential is. I would love it for being able to read third-party paper when it comes in and do a credible first draft, right? That would be a tremendous time saving, right? I don't think it's there yet, but a lot closer today than it was 9 months ago, right? When everything was being trained differently. And whether it can, how good a job that will do, different people will have different answers to that. But when we start seeing it being able to be a real time saver, I think that would change how we do it, right? Some of those work that we don't want to have to do, right? The spirit killers, as Nora says, right? It has tremendous possibilities. So we're monitoring that as a pure research tool. I mean, I think that has a lot of power to it. So there's a lot of things there, but it's definitely a different set of principles for our team, right? Because it definitely needs human intervention, make sure everything is checked, and people need to be reminded of that. And the guardrails are a little different for my team, and everyone knows that.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment because I think we've talked a few times about ChatGPT as a great tool, which it is, but I think there's a lot of education that needs to go around, especially in legal, that when we talk about generative AI, it's not actually necessarily that we're talking about ChatGPT as the tool, right? There are generative AI that can be put on top of platforms. And, within IronClad, we have a whole bunch of ways that we're using that. And I think that once people see the efficiency, the effectiveness, the time saved, Dana, some of the things you're saying, like that was a great first draft. It's going to get the adoption and the behavior up. I do think there's still skepticism, and even those who are excited about it maybe haven't used it in the way that can really accelerate their job. So within IronClad, we've already seen like 60% of our customers are using it. And what's amazing to me is the stories that I've heard are, it's not like this is 2 times or 3 times faster. We're hearing 20x. And that's like something I would not personally have expected, 6 months ago. And the number of man hours that are saved, and where people can start spending their time, to me, is quite extraordinary. So a couple of things we're seeing happen. Certainly efficiency is going up, but professional satisfaction, right? Not having to do the spirit killing roles. And, legal and lawyers are an area where it's a lot of mental health issues, a lot of burnout, because I think a lot of this is like, you want to make an impact in your job, and you kind of feel like your soul is being sucked by all these like little things that you're trying to do. You never get to do the good stuff. So I'm really excited about the future. I'm curious, where you guys think it's going to go in legal. My perspective as I lead the witness here is that once you start using it and you see how much better it is in your life, then everyone's going to be like, why doesn't our company have that? Or why are we not using that in our legal departments? Thoughts on that?
I mean, what generative AI? Go ahead, Eleanor. Sorry.
I think it's really helpful for this time in history where we are. If you're in a tech company, you're probably not hiring tons of people right now.
Yeah.
That's one of the things. So if you mix that with entry level work, you may, the longer people are at your company, the less entry level they are. So you may be able to replace some of that entry level work, which wasn't a spirit killer when you were entry level, but becomes that when you were more senior. You may be able to use it for that. I don't think we're doing that consistently, but I do agree with you that it's once people start using it and they're like, oh, I kind of liked this. It didn't do it all for me, but it gave me that first draft or that first red line. The other thing that I think about, particularly in commercial teams, is if you look at a lot of commercial teams, it's just a collection of individuals who have individual ideas, and they redline differently and they negotiate differently. You might be able to identify trends where what is most effective. How, Mary, if you and I were on the same team, how do I find out what the best things you do are, and how do you share that with me, and how do we share that with a team? So it goes back to, how does the team get trained? People are always wanting to grow and train. How do we pick out what's the best and start sharing that more broadly? I feel like AI could really help us with that, and that's something I'm excited about. So it's doing that work that you no longer want to do, as your first
Hmm.
draft, but it's also taking the best of things. And you could also say what's least effective. What have we found is least effective? So I can avoid that. And it's that tutoring and training.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I've thought about it, and I've thought about that same thing, like a positive and in a risk scenario, because I mean, what generative AI does, from my perspective, is it lowers the cost of intelligence tremendously. And there's lots of things that we don't, you can effectively outsource, especially as it gets more developed, to AI, including a lot of these entry level tasks, not just within legal departments, but across your team. So entry level, commercial contract work. Entry level customer service or account executive work and things like all of that you can imagine being taken over by generative AI. But then those are also the positions where your entry level people get trained and get the experience to develop into higher level people. So if we're outsourcing that, how are we training the humans that we will want to escalate to or want running things? I think there are answers to that. I think AI can be part of it. I think Eleanor alluded to some of that. Like, it is available as a training tool as well, but there is lots of entry level work. I like the spirit killers phrase, so I'll adopt that. That you don't want people doing, and certainly not at scale, and you can do much cheaper with AI. But that work is serving a purpose in terms of your pipeline of career development and things like that. So we have to think about how that changes in this world as well.
Look, you have to recognize as people, right? And some people are fearful, right? I mean, it's jobs. The word of jobs are going to be taken away at some point, and things. So you have to recognize that is a basic principle here, and have to be sensitive to that. My personal view is this, right? Yes, it's going to make things a lot more efficient, just like having emails on a BlackBerry and our phones did, right? And when that was all sold to us, and I'm old enough to remember getting a pager on a law firm and stuff. Oh, it's gonna make you so much more efficient. You're gonna have so much more time. Last time I checked, I work harder today than I used to, right?
Yep.
The work just keeps building. So I don't believe that is going to be a job killer from that perspective, right? Just certain tasks won't be done. I think it's going to be replaced by lots more, right? The world's just exploding with data, right? The world's just exploding with all kinds of things that we can and should be doing, right? So, change is hard, right? It's just if this is what you do, like, we can call it spirit killers, and we do, right? But that's also people actually doing that. That's how they get paid, right? And they've been doing that for X number of years. And asking them to change is a hard thing. So recognizing that, and recognizing that not everyone's going to be on the same journey, right? There's definitely people on my team who are much more excited. I mentioned, right? They are spending hours writing things in a pirate's voice, right? They're extremely excited about this, and they've, but others aren't, and they all part of the team, and just trying to make sure that we all get there together, and we actually show the value of it, and we do it in a prudent way and in a sensitive way, right? It's one of the tasks that we have.
I mean, I think you lose credibility if you say there won't be an impact, right? It will shift what is happening in the workforce, what kind of jobs. I don't think it's a net negative for jobs, but
Correct.
Technology often brings change. I mean, my aunt was a typesetter. And then word processing, she set blocks of print and these things for commercial printing. Word processing did away with all of that. I don't think word processing was net negative for job creation and economic, robustness of our workforce. But typesetters are out of jobs, right? And so people have to sort of evolve or change and find, like, there's going to be some of that. I think I wouldn't be doom and gloom about it, but I think if you say, well, everyone will be fine, we have to be thoughtful, as was just said, about how it transforms the workforce, how it opens up new things, and helping people transition if they're in things that you're not really going to invest in anymore.
Yeah, it's no different than any other disruptive technology. And I look at you guys in your specific roles. In the short term, I really am a believer that the demand for legal services, it goes up tremendously, right? I mean, think about how much this has created for you guys. This whole conversation is stuff you guys weren't working on 6 months ago, and now you're dealing with, the stuff that your company is doing, what your legal department is doing, trying to stay on top of what's happening out there. So it's a lot in the short term. And the types of roles that are going to emerge, certainly it's going to change things. That is scary. But the roles that are going to emerge in our space, legal technologists, legal data analysts, project managers, all these things that are kind of few and far between today. I really think there's so much opportunity in this space for people to grow and to, try new things and expand their horizons.
I also think it brings the legal ops world and the lawyers who are separate from the legal ops world closer together. And I think that's, yeah, I mean, really, like just thinking about
Mary's dream.
Yes, that's your dream. Well, congratulations. I think your dream is here.
I think you're right, though. It's absolutely happening.
Yeah, it's actually happening. And I saw some of the questions in here have to do with law firms, and I found that really interesting, and paralegals. And I was thinking, I haven't been in a law firm in decades, but so I don't know what they're like now. But when I was there, I do remember that there were partners who literally didn't have computers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were people who took shorthand because those partners didn't have computers. And even then, I mean, so that was in the 90s. Even then, we were all like, how can you be effective without a computer? And the answer was they couldn't be as effective as we were in what we did.
Mm-hmm.
They could be very effective in getting clients in the door, maybe, right? In that relationship building. Maybe they didn't need so much technology. But I think that is less true today. And while I agree, Alan, people are going to have different journeys. I think you can't ignore or reject AI. And that's why I've been asking, hey, can we look at how people learn? Some people learn in a group. Can we do it in a group? Some people want to do it in their free time. Some people, this feels natural. Many people, it does not. And can we bring them along that way? Because if we just say, everybody go learn something, some people are just going to be too afraid or not interested. That's the other part. We're all super interested in this. Not everybody is. And I think that thinking about, do you have people on your team who actually don't find this that interesting, who may just find it sort of annoying and it feels like a fad to them? How do you bring them along and help them find how it can help them? Or the people who are fearful they're going to lose their jobs, the typesetters, the shorthand people, how do we help retrain them and show them this is a way for them to have a path? So that's the ops and the sort of all of legal, I feel like, is coming together because you can do an ops activity, whatever level you're in. And I think it's going to be expected at some point.
Well, you gave me an opening, so now I got to do the plug for legal ops, which is, digital transformation and AI, like more and more, is becoming such a major part of your roles and your focus area. And that has been a huge catalyst for GCs and CLOs that I talk to who don't have that function stood up yet. I know all of you have mature legal ops functions, but those who haven't stood it up yet in small companies, but also in huge companies, are now thinking, all this is happening. I don't want, my entire legal department to go rogue in, figuring out which systems and tools we should be using. Can I get one person to centralize that effort, really focus the right level of attention that it needs and deserves, and kind of get that moving for our department? Shall I assume that your legal ops professionals are the people that are kind of leading the charge on the digital transformation, and how can we, what systems and tools should we be using for legal, like for our lawyers, or not?
Not necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely, to the extent we're talking about the tools and platforms we use to run the legal team, yes, like the legal operations specialists are certainly deep in that. But they're not always the people who are thinking creatively. But they don't have a monopoly on thinking creatively about what this could mean for us. So my lead commercial attorneys, my lead privacy attorney, like they're a big part of that conversation as well. Because as I think Alex said earlier, like you want people who are sort of living and breathing this, like the people who are choosing to like stay up at night, reading Hacker News about the latest AI, like they're the one, and those people are distributed across the team, and so they're part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, my comment was not that not everyone. I mean, I think everyone should have that responsibility and to some extent, but to centralize the efforts on like what tools are you looking at? How are you guys going to use it as a department, right?
Yeah, I mean, to
Well,
the extent we're looking at implementing something real. And by the way, like right now, there's a lot of companies out there. Like you go to the whatever the show floor at Clock, and all these vendors are going to be talking about what they're doing to incorporate AI. Some of that's real, some of that's not. Some of that's vaporware, some of that's aspirational. Some of it's kind of starting to happen, right? So but
Right.
to the extent you're talking about actually implementing a new tool, then yeah, like legal ops is going to be very central in helping us sort of vet and establish what that means, how we would use it. But this is so new and they can't do it on their own. And so you will have a product attorney or a privacy attorney or someone else who's helping them think through what this actually means, because these are not skill sets that people had 8 months ago. Like the people who are on the forefront of thinking about that have to be part of that conversation as well.
And it also helps to bring people along, right? I keep talking about change management, right? Change management's hard, right? People are used to doing certain things a certain way. So part of that change management is making sure that the people who are going to be using the systems have a voice in talking through what the new systems will be and how they use it, right? So that they can actually go and evangelize this to the rest of the team, right? So that it's not legal ops off in the corner, putting in a solution that's, any new thing, it's always going to get poo-pooed anyway. But having it just be much more collaborative and having the teams involved, your product commercial people involved in that decision making and why we need it and sell it, that's important. And don't assume that how mature things are. Right? I've been in this job 5 years. When I walked into this, we had 200 lawyers worldwide and we had no legal ops, right? And I'll tell you a story of how change management is difficult. We had a contract management system that no one's ever heard of, right? I think we were the only company who used it. And it was so bad that every time you try to do a search for a contract, it would shut down your computer. It took 45 minutes. So no, but they had a great solution. The solution was that a paralegal would run the search and she ran 5 laptops. So you call her up and say, hey, I need this. And she'd run it. It would take 45 minutes on a laptop, but she has 5 of them. Now,
you're hurting our impression of JLL as a technology company here.
This was 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So we put in, right? So we put in, one of the first things we did was put in a real contract management system. I had pushback on that. Why do you need it? This is working just fine.
Of course.
Like it working fine like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So even like as rudimentary as something like that, as clearly the change was necessary, you still have pushback because people don't like change. And recognizing that and recognizing how we need to sell it, right? Well, why we're doing it and making sure people understand the why, and to recognize that I understand that people don't like change. To Ellen's point, it's going to happen. We need to do it. Doesn't mean we don't do it. It's just that recognizing there is that element there and to be sensitive about it. And how do we articulate it? How do we communicate it? How do we get people to buy in, right? Some of the most skeptical people, sometimes I want them on the team as a beta user, as in making sure that they get there so that when we roll it out, there's less dissension, right? So there's a bunch of elements that we all have to do as leaders to do that. But it's a element of, people are not are people. They're just, everyone has fears, everyone has things that they like using and but they do have to change. I mean, things are changing.
Well, and Alan, to what you said earlier, like there are reasons for people to be worried and skeptical about this. There's a lot of unknowns. I think, AI, when it makes mistakes, when generative AI makes mistakes, it's different types of mistakes than humans make. I don't think it's less accurate overall, but the farness of it scares people. Like you see these self-driving cars roaming around San Francisco all the time, and they're probably safer than the cars being driven by human drivers, but they make different types of mistakes, right? Like they might like wander in an intersection, get confused by some stimulus and just stop and not move. And a human wouldn't do that. So people say, oh, those cars, like they're terrible. They're not safe. They're not good. But the AI is not looking at its phone. It's not distracted. It's not like probably net they're safer, but the mistake is different and it looks weird to people. So and I think with generative AI, it's similar. Like a customer service representative might just give you a totally wrong answer or be non-responsive or nothing. And that's one kind of inaccuracy that's bad. Generative AI gets rid of that. But generative AI might currently hallucinate and just tell you something totally wrong in a different way, or something that's nonsensical, or ask. And so it's just non-human. And so the ways it messes up are different. And I think we have to get people comfortable with the types of errors AI makes and how those are going to get driven, lower and lower and lower. But the fact that they're different than the errors people make doesn't mean that they're worse. And there's sort of a socialization of, and meeting people where they are with that fear and discomfort and sort of explaining it and educating is part of that solution. Because I understand people who think like, this is wonky and this is crazy and I'm scared of it. If you give into that, you're giving up on the potential that your company and your team is going to need to move forward and advance and stay competitive. You can't be dismissive of it. Like, you have to sort of understand why people are thinking that and sort of bring them along.
And getting people not to buy into the hype, both positive and negative, right? That's part of the hype, right? Understand what it is today, right? What it is today is a tool. It is not meant to replace human like interaction, right? It's a tool for you to do research. Doesn't mean that you can stop looking at the output and just, if you do that, you will be disbarred like the guy who did it with the fake cases, right? So if you use it as a tool and you check the cases, then it's incredibly efficient, right? You can get a lot of efficiencies out of it. So then people not getting the type, oh my God, we can't use it because it will make mistakes. Well, true, but that's why you're here to check it, right? Mm-hmm. And if you do that, it will give you lots of efficiencies and recognizing that that's where it is today. Now, it might be different, years from now where it can be trusted to do something in a completely automated fashion. But right now it's not. And so therefore, it's safe from that standpoint, as long as we do watch it.
Yeah, and I think people apply it. I agree 100%. And I think we have to be careful of applying different standards. I mean, humans make mistakes too, but somehow this AI can make mistakes is like, we can't trust it for anything. I make mistakes. My team makes mistakes all the time. The question is, what types of mistakes, why, and, is this going to improve to reduce those? And so I think sometimes people tend to say, well, it's error prone, so forget about it. Well, that doesn't differentiate it that much from all the alternatives.
But I think also, so two different things I was thinking about as you were talking about this. One is the difference between using it in your everyday work and using it in a tool, right? We keep sort of going back and forth. I think if you're using it within a tool or selecting tools, back to your question, Mary, of is it legal ops driving this? It really depends on the kind of company you're in, right? If you're in a tech company like Asana, we work with IT on our technology because while legal is the client in terms of what we want to use, first of all, we're not the only client. And that's the other thing I want to really ask people to think about when you're talking about this. So an Ironclad, who else uses Ironclad? Well, sales, right? So if you want to have a tool that has AI in it that's going to save you time, think about who else might touch it. And back to you want the skeptics on your team. You want the stakeholders on your team, particularly the skeptics, because those are the people who can bring down a project. But their skepticism may be the thing you're missing, right? And that's what you need to look at. So in my company, we brought IT in. If I was in a law firm, that might not be the right group. I don't know. Or if I was in a company that didn't, create our company's software as a service. So if I was in a hardware company, maybe it would be a different answer. But thinking about your stakeholders, thinking about who does this for a living, who chooses technology and supports technology for a living. It might be your legal ops group. It might not be. But the other part I would flip that to is I don't want to sort of put it all on legal ops, even if they are technologists. Back to what Dana was saying of, they can't anticipate everything the privacy group wants or everything that the commercial group wants. So really asking the other teams to participate and work with legal ops, and then legal ops can drive the project, but they can't do it alone. They can't read everybody's minds.
Of course. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I failed to get to any of the questions in the chat.
There's some interesting questions in there that
I know, but I think we're sort of at time, and that was such a great conversation. So First, let me say a huge thank you for all the valuable insights and takeaways, Eleanor, Dana, Alan. Such an honor and pleasure. While I still have everyone here, a couple of big announcements. Keep an eye out for a big event happening in person in Dallas on September 7th. I will be there, and virtually on the 14th. It's called Ironclad Live, and be sure to join the Ironclad community as well. We're going to be sending out today's recording within the next 24 hours. Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks
Bye,
for having
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.